with S3 Archery, and I wanted to come to you today and I wanted to talk about the topic of Bareshaft tuning. Now, Bareshaft tuning is an area of great discussion out here on the internet and on YouTube. There seems to be a lot of interest in it, but there also seems to be a lot of confusion with it. So I wanted to post a video to try to clear up that confusion and enable you all to be able to go home and Bareshaft tune your equipment as well, so you can receive optimal performance from your bow and arrow. So anyone who's watching the YouTube channel knows that last week we changed out the string on the Bear Kodiak, and I thought that would be a great time to change out the arrow as well. So I had Dan make me up some 75 to 80 spine cedar arrows, and that's why I'm going to be Bareshaft tuning today. So what I want to do is talk about why do we want to Bareshaft tune and what is it, and then I wanted to just walk you through my process from start to finish of how to do it, and hopefully that'll clear up any kind of confusion around it. So first things first, what is Bareshaft tuning? Well, Bareshaft tuning is nothing more than taking the shaft that you want to shoot, the arrow that you want to shoot out of your bow, not having any fletchings on it, and using that arrow to tune your bow. So why would we do this? Well, unlike compound bows that have an arrow rest, and we can change the rest to make the arrow work for the bow, we don't have that kind of adjustability with a traditional bow. So the only adjustments we can make to make the bow and arrow combination work together optimally is to change the arrow. So how do we do that? Well, you can change that by the spine of the arrow, meaning the flex of the arrow. You can change it by the length of the arrow, or you can change it by the tip weight, either getting less weight up front to make it stiffer or more weight to make it weaker. So that's really the adjustments that we can make to the arrow. And now, how does Bareshaft tuning work? Well, Bareshaft tuning is nothing more than shooting this Bareshaft through your bow and then interpreting it on the block what's happening. So with no feathers on it, with no fletchings on it, it has no way to correct itself. So if the arrow hits the block like this, the knock is too high, we need to bring the knock down. If it hits the block like knocked down, then we need to bring the knock up. And then if you're shooting at me and it comes in with knock to the left, that means the arrow's too weak, it's swimming around the bow too much. And if it goes in knock right, that means it never swam around the riser and it just took off to the left. So that's really how you interpret it, and then we make the adjustments to it as we see fit. So that's really all there is to it, and with that, let's just set up the block. I'll take a few shots here and I'll just walk through my process of Bareshaft tuning, and as always, feel free to post comments underneath the video and ask any questions or make any comments as we go through this process. So stick tight, let's set up the block, and let's get started. Alright, so I've got the block set up behind me. We're going to start the Bareshaft tuning process. But before we start that, I just wanted to give you a couple tips. First tip, whenever you Bareshaft tune, you want to shoot with your bow straight up and down. So I know that canting the bow is going to be the natural way that you shoot, but when you're Bareshaft tuning, you want to do it straight up and down, because if you start canting your bow, it makes it harder to interpret that Bareshaft tuning. So when you see a knock high on the block, if you canted the bow, was it really knock high, or was the arrow too weak? Because if you would have shot, let's say the arrow was too weak, if you would have shot the bow straight up and down, the arrow would have hit the block looking like this. But because you canted the bow now when it's too weak, the arrow actually rides up, so it looks like it's knock high. So by just having the bow straight up and down, it makes it easier to interpret knock high versus knock low versus too weak versus too stiff. So that's tip number one. Tip number two, actually, not sure you can see on film, but I added a big black line up here, and this end of the black line, I thought that's useful whenever you Bareshaft tune. That's kind of the point of no return. So for me, I have a 29.75 inch draw length, sometimes 30 inches. So this line is at 30 inches on the dot. So no matter what, if we start Bareshaft tuning and I have to get to this black line, I don't want to go any further, even if the arrow is still too weak, because if I go any further, the arrow is going to actually fall off the shelf and I could shoot myself in the hand or whatnot. So I want to do that as well. So, and then the third tip whenever you bear shaft tune, make sure you start very, very close to the block. You don't want to go far away from the block because there is no correcting factor. There's no fletchings on this arrow. When you shoot it, let's say it starts getting too weak, there's nothing to bring it back. So the farther you get away, the more that arrow gets sideways. And if you get too far away too soon, you're going to end up snapping a lot of bear shafts because they just hit the block at too extreme of an angle. So those are my 3 tips before you start bear shaft tuning. Now let's go ahead and we'll start. I'm going to start at about 3 yards because I know that this arrow is going to be too weak. And we'll go process by process. Alright, take the camera and we'll take a look at that real quick. Alright, so this is the angle that I shot at. So it's slightly knocked left, so it is too weak of an arrow still. So how we'll correct that is we will cut the arrow about a 1/4 inch shorter, and then we will put the tip back on and we'll shoot it again to see if that's better. So let's go inside, let's cut it, and then we will come back out and do another shot. Alright, so we just were outside, we shot the arrow. It was knocked left, which means that the arrow is too weak. So to make the arrow stiffer, what we end up doing is we shorten the arrow length. So in order to do that, all we're going to do is we're going to take our arrow out here, and we're going to start by removing the tip. Then we're going to cut down about a 1/4 inch at a time until we start micro tuning, getting very, very close. But from 3 yards, if your arrow is showing up as weak, that's pretty weak. So if it's showing up as a little bit weak from 10 yards, you're getting very, very close. But when we're at those close distances, if you start seeing weak or stiff already, that's not a very good thing. You need to make pretty big adjustments. So we're gonna chop off about a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch just to begin. So let's heat up the tip, let's pull it off, and then we'll cut it down. Okay, and then all we're going to do, take our shaft in one hand, take the hot melt in the other, heat up the hot melt, a bunch of glue on the top, spin it around. I'm always pretty liberal with that. Go ahead, take the tip, stick the tip on, and then I just like to heat the tip up again, make it as hot as possible so I can get all that excess glue out of the tip. So now I'm just heating up the tip until it starts sliding all over the place, and then I know it's hot enough. So that's about now. Take my wrench, grab the tip, and just push it down and spin it. Just keep spinning that arrow so we can push the tip as far down and make sure it's as straight as possible. Excess glue is going to come out the bottom, and now we're just going to wait. Blow out our candle. We're going to wait for that tip to stop spinning, so then we know we've got it on the right spot, and then we're going to head outside and do another bear shaft tune. Alright, so we cut that arrow down about a 1/2 inch inside. That's going to make the arrow stiffer. So rule of thumb, your arrow gets shorter, gets stiffer, more tip weight up front, it gets weaker. So those are kind of your 2 dimensions that you play with when you have a certain arrow. You can't change the spine of the arrow, so it is what it is. So we made it shorter, trying to stiffen it up a little bit. And now we're going to take a shot from 3 yards again and see if it looks a little bit better. If the arrow looks pretty straight from 3, we'll go back to 5 or 10. So that's just going to exaggerate whatever the arrow's stiffness or weakness is. So it was weak before, so I'd expect it to still be weak. But as we go further back, if it looks perfect from 3 yards, it may look a little bit off from 5, and it may look really weak from 10. And that's where we start cutting maybe a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch off instead of doing these bigger adjustments. So let's take a shot and see how much improvement we got. Alright, let's take a look at that. Alright, and this is the angle that we were shooting from. So you'll see it is perfectly straight. And then from back where I was shooting, if I get back a little bit further, you'll see that that arrow basically disappears. That was perfect knock height. So we're feeling pretty good. So let's set the camera back up from about 10 yards and we'll take a shot and see if it holds true from 10 yards. Alright, so here we are back at 10 yards now. We're going to take a shot and see how close we are. And at these distances, what we end up having is we're micro tuning now. So the problem that we have is being exaggerated. So if it looks a little bit weak, it really is just a little bit weak. To go 10 yards without having really much movement at all is pretty darn good. So we are getting down to micro tuning. So if we're still a little bit weak, we just cut off the slightest amount. So here we go, let's take a shot from 10. Make sure you have great form, it has to be consistent, same draw length, and we'll just see what we need to do. Alright, so we're coming in just like this. This was from 10 yards. You can see the arrow is just slightly knock left. And then actually when I was shooting from back there, like I was saying, it was pretty much dead straight. So I think we've got that knock height down, and now it's just the arrow. But it was basically just like this going into the block. So maybe a fraction weak. So we'll just take off just another 1/16 of an inch to complete that arrow and make it perfectly tuned for this bow. Alright, so we cut our arrow down for the second time now. Took another 1/4 inch off of it. We were pretty close before, but you know, now taking off that last 1/4 inch, I think we're going to be right there. You know, with Bareshaft tuning, it's kind of an art, not a science, and you don't need to find complete perfection. I mean, if you really want to spend hours and hours doing it, you can start shaving off 30 seconds of an inch to find that perfect spot. But in all honesty, we're still humans and we're doing traditional archery, so unless you're an absolute machine, the exact same draw length every time, there's going to be a little variability in your shooting. So it's going to be really hard to get a Bareshaft tune that goes perfectly straight in time after time. But what we're looking for is just not to have anything that if I was the block that knocks, you know, super weak or it's super stiff. We want to be in that general range where the arrow's having to correct itself very little before it gets to the block. So let's take a couple more shots here from 10 yards to verify it's right. And other than that, that's the whole process, guys. So I hopefully you learned something and this has been beneficial to you. And otherwise, until next time, shoot straight, have fun out there, guys.